Sign or
Just
get
sign the
out,
papers.
her husband mocked,
I
waving
can't.
papers in the house she fully paid for. He smirked as if throwing her out would break her. She signed, placed the keys on the table, and walked away. The next morning, his elite lawyer screamed at him, "Do you have any idea what you just let her do?" A true story for my family. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Story. May the Almighty shower each of you with unshakable health, endless success, and a love that never runs dry. May every woman be honored as the jewel of her home, every man carry the strength to protect with gentleness, and every child grow in joy, wisdom, and light. I pray your days overflow with peace, your nights with safety, and your paths with blessings beyond measure. May your hearts never know emptiness, your homes never feel broken, and your dreams always rise higher than the skies. May kindness guide you, faith protect you, and love hold you together as one. My family, you are not just listeners of my stories. You are the reason I write, the strength behind my words, and the light in my journey. If your heart is with me, write, present. If your love is true, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Renee Hall learned to count money before she learned to dream, because in her world, dreams cost more than most people could afford. The texture of hunger never leaves you. It lives in your bones, whispers in your sleep, makes you count every coin twice before spending it once. Renee knew hunger intimately. She knew the weight of it, the hollow ache that made her stomach feel like a fist clenching around nothing. She knew what it meant to choose between eating and keeping the lights on, between bus fare and soap, between surviving today and hoping for tomorrow. Her childhood was a parade of empty refrigerators and eviction notices. Her mother worked 3 jobs and still couldn't catch up to the bills that multiplied like roaches in the dark. Renee learned early that wanting something wasn't enough. The world didn't care about your wants. It cared about what you could pay for, so she stopped wanting and started working. At 16, she took a job at the textile factory on the edge of town, where the machines screamed all day and the air tasted like chemical fire. Her hands blistered, then calloused, then became something else entirely. Tools, weapons, instruments of her survival. She worked the morning shift, then the evening shift, sleeping 4 hours a night on a mattress that sagged in the middle like a broken promise. Other girls her age talked about boys and parties and dreams. Renee talked to herself in the mirror every morning, reciting numbers. How much she made, how much she saved, how much closer she was to something that felt like freedom. She taught herself accounting from library books, studying by streetlight, because the electricity in her apartment got cut off more often than it stayed on. Numbers made sense to her in ways people never did. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't promise things they couldn't deliver. They just were, clean and absolute and true. The years blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and determination. Double shifts, triple shifts. She ate 1 meal a day and called it discipline. She wore the same 3 outfits until they fell apart, and called it sacrifice. Other people saw poverty. Renee saw investment. Every paycheck, she put half into a coffee can, hidden in the back of her closet. She didn't trust banks. Banks were for people who had enough money to forget about it. She needed to see her progress, to feel the weight of those bills growing thicker, heavier, more real. She stopped going out, stopped making friends, stopped doing anything that didn't move her closer to the only goal that mattered. People called her obsessed. She called them distracted. And then, after years of bleeding herself dry 1 shift at a time, she had enough. The house wasn't much by most standards. It was small, needed repairs, sat in a neighborhood people drove through with their car doors locked. But it had a foundation. It had walls. It had a door that locked from the inside, and that door would be hers. The day she walked into that lawyer's office with her coffee can full of cash, the man behind the desk looked at her like she was confused. "Miss, we can arrange financing." "I don't need financing," Renee said, dumping the money on his desk. "Count it," he counted. His expression changed with every bill. When he finished, he looked at her differently. Not with pity anymore, but with something closer to respect. This is highly unusual. Is it enough? Yes, but then write up the papers. The closing took 3 hours. She signed her name so many times her hand cramped. When they handed her the keys, she held them in her palm and felt their weight. These weren't just keys. They were proof. Proof that she existed, that she mattered, that she could take the hunger that tried to kill her and forge it into something solid and real and hers. She drove to the house alone, walked through every room with her shoes off, feeling the floors she now owned beneath her feet. The walls were bare, the rooms were empty, but they were hers, every inch of them. Paid for with her blood and sweat, and the part of her youth she'd traded for this moment. She stood in the living room and wept, deep shaking sobs that came from somewhere ancient and wounded inside her. She'd done it. Against every odd, every voice that said she'd fail, every moment of doubt that whispered she wasn't enough. She'd done it. That night, she slept on the floor of her house. No furniture, no blankets, just her body on the hardwood and a peace she'd never known before. For 6 months, she lived in that house alone, slowly filling it with pieces of furniture she bought secondhand. Every item was a victory. A table, chairs, a bed frame. The house stopped being empty and started being a home. Then Wade Blackwell walked into her life. She met him at a community gathering she almost didn't attend. He was everything she wasn't, polished, smooth-talking, comfortable in his own skin, in a way that seemed almost foreign to her. He had the kind of smile that made you forget your own name, and eyes that looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "You're different," he told her on their first real conversation. "Everyone here is trying to impress each other. You look like you don't care what any of them think." "I don't," Renee said honestly. "I like that," Wade said, leaning closer. "I like you." She should have been suspicious. Should have questioned why a man like him, educated, connected, effortlessly charming, would be interested in a woman like her. But she was tired of being alone, tired of walls that didn't talk back, tired of wondering if survival was all there was to life. Wade courted her with a patience she found disarming. He didn't rush, didn't push. He asked about her day, listened when she talked about the house, praised her strength in ways that made her feel seen for the first time. "You did all this yourself?" he asked, walking through her home on their 5th date. "This is incredible, Renee. Do you know how rare you are?" She felt something crack open inside her. Just validation, recognition, the sense that maybe she wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe she was actually living. They married in her living room 8 months later. Small ceremony, just a few friends and a justice of the peace. Wade moved into the house she'd built, and for a while everything felt right. He made her laugh. He made her feel less alone. He made her believe that maybe happiness wasn't just for other people. But then the suggestions started. "Maybe we should really get some of your vendor accounts updated," Wade said one evening, his tone casual, easy. "Add my name to them, just for protection. What if something happened to you? I'd need access to handle things," Renee hesitated. "I've been managing them fine on my own." "I'm not saying you haven't," Wade said, his smile never wavering. "I'm just thinking about our future. Together, everything we're building together." The word "together" landed soft as a kiss. She wanted to believe in it, wanted to believe this wasn't just her anymore, fighting alone. This was them, a team, a partnership. So she added his name to a few accounts. Small ones, minor vendors. What harm could it do? Wade kissed her forehead. "That's my smart girl. You'll see. This is good for us." She didn't notice the way he said us, but meant something else entirely. Didn't see the calculation behind his eyes. The way he was already counting what he could take. What Renee didn't know was that Wade had already calculated exactly how much her trust was worth, and he was preparing to collect. Chapter 2. The papers on the table. The day your life ends isn't always the day you die. Sometimes it's the day someone you loved hands you papers and tells you to disappear. The change in Wade was so gradual that Renee couldn't pinpoint when it started. Maybe it was always there, hiding beneath the charm like rot beneath fresh paint. Or maybe the mask just got too heavy for him to hold up anymore. It began with small comments, dismissive little observations that he delivered with a smile, like they were jokes instead of cuts. "Got lucky with that contract, huh?" Wade said once, when she came home excited about a new opportunity. "Not congratulations or you earned that, just lucky. You work so hard, baby," he'd say other times, the words almost affectionate. "But you know, without someone handling the bigger picture, all that hard work only goes so far." Renee would pause, trying to understand what he meant. "What bigger picture?" "Don't worry about it," Wade would say, kissing her cheek. "That's what I'm here for." The words felt wrong, but she couldn't articulate why. He was her husband. He was supposed to support her. Maybe she was just being sensitive. Maybe she needed to trust more, but the comments kept coming, each one a little sharper than the last. "Anyone could have done that," he said once, when she solved a complicated problem with a supplier. "You're making it sound harder than it was. Simple is probably best for you anyway," he remarked another time. "No need to overcomplicate things. That's how people get in trouble." She started noticing other changes too. The way he'd answer her phone when clients called, speaking for her before she could even reach the receiver. The way he'd correct her in front of other people, as if she'd said something wrong when she knew she hadn't. The way he'd started referring to his house and his accounts in conversations with friends. "Wade, this is my house," she said once quietly, after a dinner party where he'd given someone a tour like he owned the place. "I bought it before we even met." His face hardened for just a second, a flash of something cold and ugly, before the smile returned. "Our house, baby. That's what marriage means, remember? What's yours is ours, but it wasn't what's ours. It was what's mine becomes yours." She felt it happening, felt him slowly rewriting the narrative of her life. But every time she tried to push back, he made her feel guilty for doubting him. "After everything I do for you, you're going to question me," he'd say, his voice wounded. "I'm just trying to help, Renee, trying to make sure we're protected." She'd apologize. God, she'd apologize, because he made it sound like she was the problem, like her independence was selfishness, like her caution was mistrust. The months wore on, and Wade's contempt grew bolder. He stopped hiding it behind jokes. He'd roll his eyes when she talked about her work. He'd interrupt her mid-sentence with, "Anyway, as I was saying," as if her words didn't matter. He'd make decisions about their life without consulting her, then act offended when she questioned him. "Do I need your permission now?" He'd snap. "Are you my wife or my supervisor?" She started walking on eggshells in her own home. The house that once felt like freedom started feeling like a trap. She'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when everything had gone so wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. Renee had felt something shift in the air for days before it happened. Wade had become colder, more distant, almost mechanical in his interactions with her. He'd stopped pretending to care about her day, stopped the small gestures that used to make her believe he loved her. She tried to talk to him about it, tried to understand what was wrong, but he'd brushed her off with increasing irritation. "Nothing's wrong," he'd say. "You're imagining things." But she wasn't imagining the way he looked at her now, like she was an obstacle between him and something he wanted. Like she was a problem he was calculating how to solve. That evening, Renee walked into the kitchen after a particularly long day, exhausted but relieved to be home. She'd been thinking about making dinner, maybe trying to reconnect with Wade over a meal, trying to salvage whatever was left of them. But Wade was sitting at the table, and something about his posture made her stomach drop. He wasn't looking at his phone or eating dinner or doing any of the normal things people do when they're home. He was just sitting there in the dim light, perfectly still, waiting, like a predator who'd already spotted his prey. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Those words. The 4 words that never mean anything good. The words that precede endings and disasters, and moments that split your life into before and after. "Okay," Renee said carefully, setting her bag down on the counter. Her hands were already shaking, some primal part of her recognizing danger before her conscious mind caught up. What's going on? Are you okay? Wade pulled out a stack of papers from beneath the table and threw them across the surface with enough force that some slid off onto the floor. They scattered toward her, fanning out like a deck of cards, revealing a losing hand she'd been dealt without knowing she was playing. "Sign these," he said, and his voice carried no warmth, no regret, no acknowledgement that he was about to destroy her life. Renee picked up the first page. Divorce papers. Her heart stopped. "Wade, what is this? What does it look like?" His voice was flat, cold, nothing like the man she'd married. "I'm done. This isn't working. Sign the papers and we can both move on. We can talk about this," Renee said, her voice shaking. "If you're unhappy, we can talk." Wade laughed, and the sound was cruel. "I don't want to talk, Renee. I want you to sign the papers and get out of my house." "Your house?" The words came out strangled. "This is my house. I bought it. I paid for it. You moved into our house," Wade interrupted, standing up now, looming over her. "That's what marriage means, remember? Or does that only count when it benefits you?" He picked up more papers, property transfer documents this time, and waved them in her face. "You're going to sign everything over. The house, the accounts, all of it. Because without me, Renee, you're nothing. You think you built something? I'm the one who made it matter. I'm the one who gave you value." Renee felt something fracture inside her chest. Not her heart, that would be too simple. Something deeper, something that had been holding her together since she was a child, fighting to survive. "Sign or get out," Wade said, his voice dripping with contempt. He smirked, actually smirked, like he was enjoying this. "Those are your options. And trust me, baby, you don't want to see what happens if you choose wrong." She looked at the man she'd married, the man she'd trusted, the man she'd let into the home she built with her own bleeding hands. And she saw him clearly for the first time, not as a partner, not as someone who loved her, as a thief who'd been waiting for the right moment to rob her. Every instinct in her body screamed to fight, to rage, to throw those papers in his face and make him understand what he was trying to steal. But something else, something colder and clearer took over. If he wanted her gone, she'd leave. But she'd do it her way. Renee picked up the pen Wade had left on the table. Her hands were steady now, steady in a way they hadn't been in months. She read through every page carefully, while Wade watched, his smirk growing wider with each signature. "That's right," he said softly. "Be a good girl and sign." She signed the divorce papers. Every page, every line. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her keys. The keys to the house she'd bought with hunger and hope. She placed them on the table between them, the metal clicking against the wood with a sound that felt final. Renee looked Wade Blackwell dead in the eye and said nothing. No tears, no pleas, no anger, just silence that somehow said everything. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Her door, the one she'd unlocked 1,000 times with dreams of coming home to something good. "That's what I thought," Wade called after her, already pouring himself a drink. "You always knew your place, didn't you?" Renee opened the door and stepped out into the night, holding her tears back until no one could see them fall. Behind her, Wade raised his glass in a private toast, already imagining which furniture he'd replace first. Never noticing the legal landmine Renee had just activated with her signature. Chapter 3. The lawyers scream victory and taste sweetest in the first hour before you realize you've been drinking poison. Wade woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows of his house. Yes, his house now, and felt pure satisfaction. He'd won completely. Renee was gone, and everything she'd built now belonged to him. He stretched in bed, taking up all the space. No more tiptoeing around her feelings. No more pretending to care. No more playing the supportive husband when all he wanted was the payoff. The house alone was worth more than he'd made in years. Plus the accounts, the connections, the reputation he could now claim as his own. Wade made coffee in the kitchen that was finally his. He looked at the keys Renee had left on the table and felt a surge of triumph. She'd been so broken, so defeated. The look on her face when she signed those papers was almost worth more than the house itself. He called a realtor while eating breakfast. "Yeah, I've got a property I'm looking to list. Prime location, newly available. I'm thinking we can get a premium price if we move fast." The realtor asked questions about square footage, recent renovations, the neighborhood market. Wade answered with complete confidence, describing improvements Renee had made as if he'd planned them. "This sounds promising," the realtor said. "I'll need to see the deed and title documents before we proceed." "Of course. I'll have my lawyer send everything over, and just to confirm, you're the sole owner." "Absolutely," Wade said, the lie smooth as silk. After all, the papers were signed. Renee had walked away. That made it his, didn't it? Then his phone rang. Thornton Webb, his lawyer. Wade grinned. Thornton probably wanted to congratulate him on the clean divorce. "Thornton, I was just about to call you. Everything went perfectly last night. Renee signed without even putting up a fight. Where are you?" Thornton's voice was tight, wrong. "Home, my home." "Why?" "Stay there. I'm coming over right now. What's wrong?" "The papers are signed. Don't file anything. Don't call anyone. Don't touch those papers until I get there." The line went dead. Wade stared at his phone, feeling the first cold finger of doubt. Thornton wasn't the panicking type. So why did he sound terrified? The knock came hard and urgent. Wade opened the door to find Thornton standing there, briefcase in hand, face pale as paper. "We need to talk," Thornton said, pushing past him. "Sit down." "Jesus, Thornton, what's going on?" The lawyer slammed his briefcase on the kitchen table and pulled out documents. "Lots of documents. Do you have any idea what you just let her do?" Thornton's voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" "She signed everything. She left." "I won. You won." Thornton's shout made Wade flinch. "You didn't win anything. You just handed her everything. That doesn't make sense. The papers you had her sign are worthless. Completely legally worthless." Wade felt the floor shift. "No, that's not possible. You wrote them. I wrote draft documents for review," Thornton shouted. "I told you we needed to file them properly through the court. You can't just force your wife to sign without legal oversight." The room spun. "But she signed them. It doesn't matter. The house was solely in her name. Only her name, Wade. You were never on the title. By forcing her signature without a court-approved settlement, you forfeited any claims you might have had. That's impossible. We're married. Half is mine, not when you commit procedural violations." Thornton pulled out more papers. "And that's not even the worst part." "How is there a worse part?" "The joint ventures you thought you controlled. Renee structured them with protections. Every contract has clauses that activate in divorce. Control reverts to the primary stakeholder, her, unless there's a settlement agreement. You don't have one." The coffee in Wade's stomach turned to acid. "She couldn't have known." "Of course she knew. You walked right into it." Wade sank into a chair. "Okay, this is bad, but we can fix it. We'll refile properly." "We're not done." Thornton's voice dropped. "I got calls from 3 banks this morning. They're looking for you." "Banks? What banks?" "The ones you took loans from using Renee's name as security." The air left the room. "Wade, tell me you didn't take out loans using her assets as collateral." Wade's silence was answer enough. "How much?" "I needed capital. You said I needed to look successful." How much?" "6 figures." Thornton closed his eyes. "Of course. And now that you've divorced her, those loans collapse back on you." "Solely on you." Wade's phone buzzed. "Account frozen pending investigation." Then another. And another. "Every financial institution locking down at once." "That's them," Thornton said. "They're seizing your assets. And you don't have enough to cover the debts. This can't be happening. It's very real. And one more thing." Thornton pulled out a final document. "Those luxury cars you've been driving? Leased through Renee's company. She's repossessed all of them." Wade ran to the window. "The driveway was empty. How did she do this?" "She was smarter than you," Thornton said simply. "She was always smarter than you." Wade stared at the keys on the table. They'd felt like surrender last night. Now they looked like the pin from a grenade. "What do I do?" Wade asked, his voice small and frightened. "Thornton, what do I do?" The lawyer began packing up his documents slowly, methodically. You survive, Wade. If you can. You deal with the creditors, the lawsuits, the consequences. You find a way to live with what you've done. But you'll help me, right? You'll represent me through— No, Thornton said, closing his briefcase with a decisive click. I won't. You lied to me about the loans. You ignored my explicit instructions about the divorce filing. You committed what might be fraud, Wade. I can't represent someone who won't tell me the truth, but I need— What you need, Thornton said, walking toward the door, is a miracle. And those are in short supply these days. He left without another word. The door closed behind him, with a sound like finality itself. Wade stood alone in the house that wasn't his, surrounded by furniture he couldn't keep, holding keys that opened nothing, staring at a future that had just collapsed into rubble. And somewhere across town, Renee Hall was starting her day, building her empire, living her life, completely free of him. Chapter 4. The Empire of Lies. Man built on borrowed money and a stolen reputation discovers that both come due at the same time. The collapse happened faster than Wade thought possible. Within a week, his phone became a weapon attacking him every time it rang. Collection agencies, banks, lawyers representing creditors, all asking, "Where's the money?" Wade moved out of the house within days. A sheriff's deputy delivered the notice personally. You've got 48 hours to remove your belongings. After that, anything left becomes property of the legal owner. He packed in a humiliating rush, throwing boxes into his car, one of the few vehicles not yet repossessed. He found a small apartment across town, the kind of place he used to drive past without seeing. Now it was all he could afford. Actually, he couldn't really afford it. The deposit had eaten through his last accessible funds. But the landlord didn't know that yet. The first thing Wade tried was reaching out to his business associates, people who'd taken his calls days earlier, who'd treated him like someone worth knowing. Surely they'd understand this was temporary. Marcus Hendricks was first. Marcus ran a distribution operation and had always been friendly. Marcus! Good to hear your voice. Listen, I wanted to touch base about that expansion opportunity. Wade. Marcus's voice was cold. I'm going to stop you right there. Is this a bad time? I talked to Renee yesterday. The words hit like a fist. Oh, look, whatever she said, she told me to check whose name was on the founding documents. So I did. Your name isn't there, Wade. Anywhere, you were never the principal. You were just the guy she brought to meetings. Marcus, that's not fair. I've been negotiating with the wrong person for 2 years. Do you understand that? I'm cutting ties. Don't call this number again. The line went dead. Wade tried 4 more contacts that day. The conversations were similar. Some more polite. Others hung up mid-sentence. But the message was the same. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. By the end of the week, he had 17 meeting cancellations. 17 people who suddenly had conflicts, who needed to postpone indefinitely. The whispers started at the country club. He went there one afternoon, desperate for normalcy. He was at the bar when he heard the voices. Is that Wade Blackwell? Yeah, the guy who tried to steal his wife's house. I heard he took out loans using her name. Some kind of fraud, parasite. She built everything, he took credit, then tried to steal it. Wade turned around. 3 men he vaguely knew looked away quickly, but the words were out there. He left his drink unfinished. As he passed a table of women having lunch, their conversation paused just long enough for him to know they'd been talking about him too. His mother called that night. Mom, thank God, I've been meaning to call. What have you done, Wade? Her voice was ice. It's complicated, but you married that girl who built herself from nothing. And you tried to steal from her? I didn't steal. We were married. Nothing was yours. And now everyone knows. Everyone knows my son is a thief and a fraud. Mom, please, do you know what it's like for me at church? Women I've known for decades won't look at me. You've humiliated this family. I can fix this. Don't call me again. Not until you fix what you broke. She hung up. His own mother hung up on him. Wade threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and cracked, which felt appropriate. Everything was cracking. The worst part was the silence. People who used to text him daily, nothing. Friends who used to invite him places gone. The social circles he'd cultivated all vanished. Wade started spending evenings alone, drinking cheap whiskey and scrolling through social media. That's where he saw the first photo of Renee at some corporate event, smiling and confident. The caption, "Honored to support women building their own futures." The comments were filled with praise. Nobody mentioned Wade. He'd been erased from her story. Like he'd never existed, he tried one last move, got dressed in his best remaining suit, and went to Gerald Pryor's office. Wade waited in the lobby for 20 minutes. Finally, Gerald's secretary emerged. "Mr. Pryor asked me to tell you he's not available." "I can wait." "Just 5 minutes, he's not available. And he asked me to suggest that you not return." "Why won't anyone talk to me?" The secretary looked at him with pity. "You're toxic, Mr. Blackwell. Being associated with you is career suicide. Surely you understand security didn't have to escort him out. He left on his own." That night, Wade sat surrounded by unpaid bills and empty bottles. His cracked phone buzzed with one new email, an invitation, cream-colored, elegant, formal. "You are cordially invited to the Renee Hall Foundation annual gala." Wade stared at it for hours. She wanted him to see what she'd built while he fell apart. He should delete it, should save himself the humiliation, but he couldn't. Some desperate part of him needed to see her. Needed to try one more time to make her understand he was sorry. Wade opened his closet. One good suit left, one tie. He'd have to borrow shoes. Going to ride, but he could make himself presentable enough to get through the door. He was going to that gala. He was going to find Renee, and he was going to beg. Some doors open to opportunity, others open to judgment. Wade Blackwell was about to walk through the latter. Chapter 5. The woman who rose. They expected her to hide in shame. She built monuments instead. Renee Hall didn't cry after she left the house. She'd done her crying in the car, pulled over on some dark road where no one could see her brake. She'd screamed into the steering wheel, beat her fists against the dashboard, let out years of pain and betrayal in violent, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and ancient inside her. And when she was done, when her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen and her body felt hollow, she wiped her face, started the car, and drove toward her future. Because that's what survivors do. They feel everything and then they keep moving. The first thing she did was call her lawyer. Not Thornton Webb, he was Wade's lawyer. Her lawyer, a woman named Patricia Vance, who she'd hired months earlier when Wade's behavior started shifting from dismissive to dangerous. Renee had sensed something coming, had felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, and she'd prepared. "Did you sign the papers?" Patricia asked immediately, her voice sharp with focus. "Yes." "Good. He just forfeited everything. I'll file the proper documents tomorrow morning. The house remains solely yours. All contracts revert to your control, and his debt exposure is entirely his problem now. What about the cars?" "I'll initiate repossession proceedings. We'll have them back by morning. And the business accounts. Already frozen him out. He'll figure it out when he tries to access them, which I'm guessing will be soon." Renee felt something cold and certain settling in her chest. Not revenge. Something cleaner than that. Justice, consequence, the natural result of Wade's choices coming home to roost. She hadn't destroyed him. She'd simply stopped holding him up, and gravity had done the rest. "Thank you, Patricia. Don't thank me. You did this, Renee. You protected yourself before you even knew you'd need to. That takes foresight most people don't have. That takes strategic thinking and the courage to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." After she hung up, Renee checked into a hotel. Not a cheap one. Not a place that smelled like desperation and temporary defeat. A good hotel, with clean sheets and room service, and a view of the city lights that reminded her she was still here. Still standing, still capable of choosing better for herself. She ordered food, real food, not the cheap meals she'd grown up eating, or the performative dinners Wade had insisted on. She ate it slowly, tasting every bite, reclaiming the simple pleasure of nourishing herself. Took a long shower that washed away more than just the day's grime. And then she sat on the bed and made a list, everything she'd lost. Everything she still had, everything she was going to build. The list of what she'd lost was short. Wade. That was it. Just Wade, a man who'd turned out to be made of lies and contempt and borrowed confidence. Losing him wasn't a loss. It was a liberation. The list of what she still had was longer. Her house, her accounts, her contracts, her skills, her determination, a hunger that never really went away, just learned to wear different clothes and speak in boardroom language. Her ability to survive anything because she'd already survived everything. The list of what she was going to build, that list filled 3 pages and kept growing. Renee didn't go back to the house immediately. She let Wade stew there for a few days, let him enjoy his imaginary victory before reality came knocking with eviction notices and frozen accounts. Meanwhile, she started making calls, building, creating, transforming her pain into something purposeful. To suppliers she'd worked with for years. I'm expanding operations. I'm thinking bigger than before. Are you interested in growing with me? To women she'd mentored casually in the past. I'm starting something new, something important. I need good people who understand what it means to fight for yourself. Are you available? To investors she'd met but never pursued. I have an opportunity that's about more than profit. It's about changing lives. Let me show you the numbers and the mission. Within a week, she'd laid the groundwork for something bigger than anything she'd built before. Not just accounts and contracts and revenue streams. Something with purpose. Something that mattered beyond her own survival. She called it the Renee Hall Foundation. Its mission was simple but powerful. Help women escape financial abuse and build independent lives. Give them the tools she'd wished she had. Create the support system that might have saved her years of pain. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was turning her own pain into something that could heal others. Wade had tried to steal her foundation, and instead she was using the experience to build actual foundations for people who needed them. Every betrayal has a lesson. Hers was teaching her what she was truly capable of. The press loved the story. Local news picked it up first. Woman turns personal betrayal into mission of empowerment. Then regional outlets started calling. Then national media. By the end of the month, Renee had done interviews with major magazines, morning shows, business journals. They all wanted to know the details of her divorce. They wanted the drama, the tears, the revenge angle. She didn't give it to them. Didn't name Wade. Didn't turn her trauma into entertainment. I married someone who didn't see me as a partner, she said in one interview, her voice steady and clear. Someone who saw me as a resource to exploit. And I stayed longer than I should have because I wanted to believe love could be enough. But love without respect is just pretty words covering up contempt. It's a beautiful lie that keeps you trapped. The interviewer leaned forward, sensing something profound. What would you say to other women in similar situations? I'd say document everything, Renee answered without hesitation. Protect yourself legally before you think you need to. Keep your own accounts. Keep your own credit. Keep your own identity separate from any relationship. And understand that leaving isn't failure. Staying with someone who diminishes you is the real failure. You're not giving up. You're giving yourself a chance. The interview went viral within hours. Women shared it thousands of times with captions like this, and finally someone said it, and I needed to hear this today, and sending this to every woman I know. Renee became the face of a movement she didn't know she was starting. Women reached out from everywhere, from tiny towns where everyone knew your business, from big cities where you could disappear into crowds, from poverty and from wealth, all with the same story in different words. They'd given everything to someone who gave back nothing but manipulation and diminishment and the slow erosion of self. So Renee expanded faster than she'd planned. She opened training centers in 3 cities within the first 2 months. She funded scholarships for women returning to education after years away. She created programs that taught financial literacy, legal protection, self-advocacy. She hired lawyers to help women who couldn't afford representation. She built networks of support that extended across multiple states, connecting survivors with each other, creating community where isolation had once ruled. Every program bore her name, but more importantly, bore her values: self-sufficiency, dignity, strength, the refusal to let anyone make you smaller than you are, the understanding that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Business journals wrote profiles about her, not just as a survivor, though that was part of her story, but as a strategist, a visionary, someone who understood how to build sustainable systems that created real change. Renee Hall's business empire built on resilience, one headline read. Another, the new face of independent wealth creation. She appeared on morning shows where hosts asked about her story, at conferences where entrepreneurs wanted to understand her model, in boardrooms where powerful people sought her advice on everything from strategic planning to building organizational culture. And through it all, she never mentioned Wade's name, never gave him the oxygen of her attention, never let him become part of her narrative except as an anonymous obstacle she'd overcome. He'd tried to erase her from his success story. Instead, she eclipsed him so completely he might as well have never existed. Renee bought a new house within 3 months, bigger than the first one, in a neighborhood where trees lined the streets and children played safely in yards. She furnished it exactly how she wanted. No compromises, no adjustments for someone else's taste, no wondering if someone would criticize her choices. Every room reflected her, only her, perfectly her. She hired people she trusted, promoted women who reminded her of her younger self, hungry, determined, unwilling to accept less than they deserved, willing to work harder than anyone thought possible. She built an organization that ran like clockwork, because she'd learned long ago that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. And the second best option is people you've vetted thoroughly and paid well. Her mother called one day, her voice thick with emotion that she was trying to hide. "Baby girl, I'm so proud of you. I always knew you were strong, but this, what you're building, this is something special." "You knew I could survive," Renee corrected gently, understanding the difference now. "That's different from being special. Survival is what you do when you have no choice. This is what you do when you choose to transform pain into purpose." "Well, you're transforming it beautifully," her mother said. "Your daddy would be so proud." "I wish he could see this." "He can," Renee said softly. "I feel him with me sometimes, in the quiet moments, reminding me that I come from people who survived worse, that I have strength in my blood." One evening, 6 months after leaving Wade, Renee stood in her new living room and looked out at the city. She thought about the girl she'd been, poor, hungry, desperate for proof that she mattered, willing to trade everything for the illusion of security. She thought about the woman she'd become, still hungry, but for different things now. Not survival, purpose, impact, legacy. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. The Foundation's annual gala was coming up, the biggest event she'd ever organized. Hundreds of people, major donors, press coverage. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She approved the final guest list without much attention to individual names. But her assistant had included one name that Renee nearly deleted: Wade Blackwell. Her finger hovered over the delete button. Why would she invite him? Why give him access to her triumph? Why let him anywhere near her again? But then she paused, reconsidered, saw an opportunity she hadn't expected. Let him come. Let him see exactly what she'd built while he was falling apart. Let him witness firsthand what happened when you bet against Renee Hall. Let him understand in the most visceral way possible the cost of his choices. She approved the invitation. The gala was scheduled for the following month. Renee spent that time preparing meticulously, making sure every detail was perfect. The venue, the speakers, the program, the message. This wasn't just a fundraiser. This was a statement. This was her declaring to the world exactly who she was and what she stood for. She bought a new gown for the occasion. Midnight blue, elegant, powerful, the kind of dress that made you feel like you could conquer anything. She looked at herself in the mirror the night before the gala and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she'd changed, because she'd finally become exactly who she was always meant to be. The woman in that mirror didn't need validation from anyone. Didn't need to prove her worth to skeptics or doubters or men who'd underestimated her. Didn't need Wade Blackwell's approval or his regret or his apology or his acknowledgement. She was complete, self-contained, unbreakable, a force of nature who'd learned to harness storms instead of being destroyed by them. And tomorrow, she'd step onto that stage and show the world exactly what happens when you try to destroy a woman who knows her own strength. Success is the loudest revenge, and Renee Hall was deafening, while Wade Blackwell was learning that silence can be its own kind of death. Chapter 6. The descent rock bottom has a basement, and Wade Blackwell was still falling. The thing about losing everything is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's 1,000 small humiliations stacked on top of each other until the weight becomes unbearable. Wade learned this in brutal increments. The lawsuits came in a flood. Creditors he'd forgotten about, banks he'd borrowed from, vendors who'd extended credit based on his association with Renee. They all wanted their money now. His former lawyer had tried to explain the legal situation. Wade stopped listening. The numbers were too big. The consequences too severe. His bank accounts were frozen within days. Every credit card declined. Every attempt to access funds met with, "This transaction cannot be completed." His apartment rent went unpaid. First month, then the second. The landlord knocked with increasing frequency and decreasing patience. "Mr. Blackwell, we need to discuss your situation. I'm working on it. Just a few more days. That's what you said last week. You've got 30 days to vacate." Wade took the eviction notice with shaking hands. 30 days. Then he'd be on the street. He sold everything of value. His watch went first. The pawnbroker had looked at it with disinterest. 200. "It's worth 3,000. I paid. I don't care what you paid." 200. "Take it or leave it." Wade took it. What choice did he have? His furniture followed. His clothes, his laptop. Everything converted to cash that immediately went to creditors who barely noticed. It was like filling an ocean with a teaspoon. He tried to find work, applied to positions that would have been beneath him months earlier. But employers could sense the desperation, could smell the failure. "We'll keep your application on file," they'd say. Code for "don't call us." The worst part was the visibility of his collapse. He'd made sure everyone knew about his success. Now people watched his descent with fascination. The paparazzi found him one night leaving a bar. The photos went everywhere. Wade Blackwell, unshaven and hollow-eyed, stumbling to a borrowed car. Caption: "Former high roller Wade Blackwell, spotted drinking alone." The comments were brutal. "Karma is real. This is what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." Renee Hall dodged a bullet. Actually, she didn't dodge it. She signed papers and walked away like a boss. Wade stopped reading, but he couldn't stop seeing the photos everywhere. He tried to reconnect with people from his old life, showed up at their offices unannounced since they wouldn't return calls. "Wade, this isn't a good time," Marcus said when Wade appeared at his office. 5 minutes. "Just to explain, I know what happened. Everyone knows. Showing up unannounced makes you look desperate." "I am desperate. Everything has fallen apart and I just need—" "What do you need? Money? A job? A reference?" "I can't give you any of those. Being associated with you is toxic, so years of friendship just gone. We weren't friends. We were business associates. And that was only because I thought you brought something to the table. Now I know you didn't. Security will show you out. Security didn't have to." Wade left on his own. He tried 3 other contacts. Similar results. Polite rejections. Doors closing. One colleague was direct. "You're a cautionary tale now." Nobody wants to be the person who helped the cautionary tale. Wade spent his days in his apartment, staring at walls, wondering how everything went so wrong. At night, he'd drive past Renee's building in borrowed vehicles. Not stalking, just observing. The lights were always on. People always moving. Her business thriving while his life crumbled. Sometimes he'd see her through windows. She looked different, lighter, free, like she'd shed massive weight. That weight had been him. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday. Wade stared at it for an hour. 30 days to vacate. Then he'd be homeless. He had nowhere to go, no money, no friends willing to help. Wade called his mother. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He tried again the next day. She answered, "Mom, I need help." "Are you sober?" "What? Have you been drinking today?" "That's not, I'm being evicted. I need a place to stay." "No, Mom, please. I'm your son. You're a grown man who made grown man choices. You tried to steal from your wife. You lied to everyone. Those aren't my values. I didn't raise you to be a thief. I didn't steal anything. You tried to, and you failed. Figure out your own life. I'm done cleaning up your disasters." She hung up. Wade sat in his nearly empty apartment and felt something break that he didn't think could break anymore. His mother had abandoned him. Everyone had abandoned him, except one person. One person had sent him an invitation to her gala. One person wanted him to see what she'd built, Renee. He pulled the invitation out, crumpled from being folded and unfolded. The gala was in 2 weeks. He'd need to borrow a suit, borrow shoes, find a ride, but he'd go. Because maybe if he could talk to her, make her understand how sorry he was, maybe she'd help him, maybe she'd give him another chance. Wade spent 2 weeks in desperate preparation. Borrowed a suit from a cousin, spinning a story about a job interview. Borrowed shoes from a former co-worker. Convinced an acquaintance to give him a ride by lying about where he was going. The day arrived. Wade stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his borrowed tie, barely recognizing himself. He'd lost weight. His face looked gaunt, older. His eyes hollow, but he was going. He was going to walk into that ballroom full of people who hated him, and he was going to find Renee, and he was going to make her listen. What else did he have left to lose? Then the invitation arrived, cream-colored, elegant, mocking, "You are cordially invited to the Renee Hall Foundation annual gala." Wade stared at it for hours, his hands shaking, knowing he had to go. Chapter 7. The Gala of Reckoning. Some doors open to opportunity, others open to judgment. Wade Blackwell was about to walk through the latter. The ballroom of the Grand Heights Hotel glittered like something from another world. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings, painted with gold leaf, each one worth more than Wade had earned in his best year. Tables draped in white linen surrounded a stage where Renee would speak. The whole space arranged with the kind of effortless elegance that comes from unlimited resources and impeccable taste. Hundreds of people filled the space, successful, confident, comfortable in their expensive clothes and easy conversation. These were people who belonged here, people who'd earned their place through genuine achievement rather than borrowed credibility. Wade felt every one of their eyes on him the moment he walked through the door. He'd arrived deliberately late, hoping to slip in unnoticed during the pre-dinner socializing, when everyone would be distracted by drinks and conversation. But there's no such thing as unnoticed when you're the villain in everyone's favorite story. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat fields. Wade could feel them, could almost hear the specific words, even when he couldn't make out the actual sentences. His name, Renee's name. Words like tried to steal and fraud and parasite. He kept his head down, moving toward the edges of the room where the lighting was dimmer and the crowds were thinner. His borrowed suit felt wrong. Too big in the shoulders, too tight in the waist, the fabric slightly musty like it had been stored in someone's closet for years. His borrowed shoes pinched his feet with every step, raising blisters he'd have to deal with later. He was an imposter in a borrowed life, and everyone could see it. Wade grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, more for something to hold than any desire to drink. The glass was real crystal, heavy in his hand, probably worth more than anything he currently owned. He lifted it to his lips but didn't drink, just used it as a prop to look occupied, purposeful, like he had a reason to be here. People walked past him without acknowledgement. Not hostile, not aggressive, just blank, like he was furniture. A coat rack, something to navigate around but not notice. Marcus Hendricks walked within 3 feet of Wade and didn't even glance in his direction. Gerald Pryor did the same. engaged in animated conversation with someone Wade didn't recognize. People he used to consider friends, or at least friendly acquaintances, treated him like a ghost, invisible, already forgotten. Then someone spoke his name. Not to him, about him. Loud enough to be heard across the immediate area. That's Wade Blackwell. The voice belonged to a woman in a red dress, talking to her companion in that particular tone people use when they want to be overheard. The one who tried to steal Renee's house. Can you believe he had the nerve to show up here? I heard he used her name to take out loans, her companion replied, matching her volume. Some kind of fraud scheme. The man's got no shame. Parasite is what my husband called him, the red-dress woman continued. She built everything from nothing, and he swooped in to take credit and steal it, then tried to throw her out of her own house when she wouldn't go along with his lies. Look at him now. Looks like he's been sleeping in his car, if he even still has a car. I heard everything got repossessed. Wade's face burned. His hands shook, making the champagne tremble in its crystal glass. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't that simple, that they didn't understand the full story. But what defense did he have? What explanation would make any of this look better? The truth was the truth. He'd married Renee for what she had. He'd tried to take it from her when she wouldn't play along. He'd failed spectacularly. And now he was paying the price while she was being celebrated. He deserved every whisper, every judgment, every cold shoulder. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the crowd, conversations trailing off mid-sentence. Someone was coming, and then she entered. The room rose as one, a standing ovation before she'd even reached the stage. Applause thundered through the ballroom, genuine and enthusiastic and earned. This wasn't polite charity applause or obligatory recognition. This was real admiration, real respect, real love. Renee Hall walked through the crowd like royalty among her subjects. She wore a midnight blue gown that caught the light with every movement, fitted perfectly to her figure, the kind of dress that cost more than Wade's entire borrowed outfit combined. Diamonds sparkled at her throat and wrists, not flashy, not ostentatious, just present, elegant, understated wealth worn with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Her hair was styled in a natural crown of curls that framed her face, and Wade realized with a shock that he'd never seen her wear it like that when they were married. She'd always straightened it, always tried to make it smaller, more professional. Now she wore it proud and full and magnificent, but it was her expression that made Wade's chest tighten with something like grief. She wasn't smiling the way she used to, tentative, hopeful, looking for approval from him or anyone else. She smiled like someone who knew exactly who she was and didn't need anyone else to validate it. She was radiant, powerful, untouchable. Everything Wade had tried to diminish, now shining so brightly he could barely look at her, and she was everything Wade had tried to diminish, now shining so brightly that he could barely stand to look at her without feeling the full weight of what he'd lost. The applause continued as she made her way to the stage, a path opening before her, like the sea parting. People reached out to shake her hand, to congratulate her, to simply be near her. She acknowledged each one with grace, never rushing, never seeming overwhelmed. This was her element, her moment, her triumph. Wade pressed himself against the wall, trying to become invisible. But he couldn't stop watching her, couldn't stop feeling the knife edge of realization cutting through his chest. He'd had this. He'd been married to this extraordinary woman, and he'd thrown it away because he was too small, too insecure, too greedy to appreciate what he had. Renee reached the stage and turned to face the crowd. The applause finally died down, the room settling into expectant silence. Hundreds of people, all focused on her, all waiting to hear what she would say. Wade moved closer. Not much, just enough to get a better view, to be able to hear clearly, just enough to be within the sphere of her presence, even if she didn't know he was there. But she knew. Of course she knew. As she scanned the crowd, preparing to speak, her eyes found him. Just for a second. Just long enough for him to see recognition, acknowledgement, and something else he couldn't quite name. Not anger, not fear, not even contempt, indifference. She looked at him the way you'd look at a stranger on a bus, someone you passed on the street and forgot immediately after. He meant nothing to her. He was nothing to her. Less than nothing. He was a lesson learned, a mistake corrected, a chapter closed. The realization was worse than any anger could have been. If she hated him, that would be something. But this absolute absence of feeling, this was erasure. This was being reduced to nothing. Renee began to speak, her voice clear and strong and filling every corner of the massive ballroom. Thank you all for being here tonight, for supporting the foundation and the women whose lives we're trying to change. Before we get to the program, I want to talk about something personal. The room leaned in collectively. Wade's heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. I want to talk about betrayal, she said, and the silence became absolute. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, where someone discovers a secret and everything explodes at once, but the slow, methodical destruction of trust. The kind where someone makes you doubt your own worth, your own achievements, until you almost believe their lies. Wade felt every eye in the room shift toward him, even the ones that couldn't see him through the crowd. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Everyone understood the subtext. I built something from nothing, Renee continued, her voice steady and clear. Literally nothing. I knew hunger so well I could taste it in my sleep. I worked jobs that broke my body and saved money that should have been spent on basic necessities. And I did it because I refused to accept that poverty was my destiny. The audience was riveted, hanging on every word. Wade's throat tightened, making it hard to breathe. Then someone came into my life who tried to convince me that what I'd built wasn't mine, that I hadn't really achieved anything, that without him I was worthless. She paused, letting the words settle, letting everyone absorb exactly what she was saying. But here's what betrayal teaches you. If you're paying attention, your value isn't determined by who stays. It's proven by who leaves and discovers they took nothing with them. The applause started slow, just a few people clapping, then built like thunder rolling across the sky. People rose to their feet, the standing ovation more powerful than when she'd entered. This wasn't just recognition of her success. This was solidarity, understanding, the collective acknowledgement that she'd spoken a truth millions of people felt but couldn't articulate. Wade stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. She was talking about him. Everyone knew she was talking about him, and she was doing it without saying his name, without giving him even that small acknowledgement of his existence. He tried to move toward the stage, his body making the decision before his mind could stop it, pushed through the crowd that parted reluctantly, people turning to stare as he passed. Someone sneered, not quietly enough. That's him. The man who forced her out of her own house. The fool who mocked her strength and tried to steal everything she'd built. He's pathetic, another voice said, the contempt clear. Look at him now. All that arrogance, and for what? Nothing. He's got nothing. Karma is real and she's vicious. Good. He deserves every bit of this. Wade ignored them, or tried to. He had to reach her. Had to make her see him, hear him, understand that he'd learned his lesson, that everything had fallen apart, and he needed God. He needed so many things, but mostly he needed her to give him another chance. Security moved to intercept him. Two large men in dark suits, their expressions professionally neutral, their body language unmistakably blocking his path. Sir, you need to... But Renee's voice cut through the tension, amplified by the microphone, commanding and clear and impossible to ignore. Let him through. Everyone turned to stare at her. The security guards hesitated, looking confused, checking to make sure they'd heard correctly. Let him through, Renee repeated, her voice carrying authority that left no room for debate. Let him speak. Let everyone hear what he has to say. The crowd parted, creating a path straight to the stage, a corridor of judgment leading directly to his reckoning. Wade felt hundreds of eyes on him, felt the weight of their collective disdain, their curiosity, their anticipation of watching him humiliate himself. He walked that path anyway, because what choice did he have? He'd come this far. He'd lost everything. This was his last chance, his final opportunity to salvage something from the wreckage of his life. The distance between pride and desperation is shorter than most men think. Wade Blackwell was about to measure it in footsteps. Chapter 8. The speech that shattered. The most powerful words aren't always loud. Sometimes they're the quiet truths that expose every lie. Wade climbed the stairs to the stage on legs that felt disconnected from his body. Every step echoed in the silent ballroom, the sound of his borrowed shoes on polished wood, somehow louder than the whispers had been. Hundreds of people watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt, but none of that mattered. Only Renee mattered. Only this moment mattered. Only the desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, he could find the words that would make her see past his mistakes to the broken man who'd learned his lesson too late. He reached the top of the stairs and stopped a few feet from her, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Up close, under the harsh stage lights, he could see her more clearly. The strength in her posture, the certainty in her eyes, the complete absence of the insecurity he'd spent years cultivating in her. She was gone. The woman he'd married, the one who'd doubted herself, who'd sought his approval, who'd believed his lies about her inadequacy, was gone completely. In her place stood someone he'd never actually known, someone who'd always been there, buried under his manipulation, now fully emerged and magnificent. "Renee!" Wade started, his voice cracking on her name. He wasn't using a microphone, but in the absolute silence of the ballroom, everyone could hear him. I need to talk to you." "So talk," Renee said, her amplified voice filling every corner of the space. "You have everyone's attention, mine included. Say what you came to say." Wade's throat closed up. This wasn't how he'd imagined it. He'd thought maybe they'd step aside, have a private conversation, find some way to communicate without hundreds of witnesses documenting every word. But no, she was making him do this publicly, making him bare himself in front of everyone who'd already judged him, making him perform his humiliation for an audience. "I was wrong," he managed to say, the words coming out desperate and pleading. "About everything. About you, about us, about what mattered. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. God, Renee, I'm so sorry." The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other, lacking the eloquence or structure he'd rehearsed in his head. He heard himself and hated how he sounded. Pathetic, whining, reduced to begging. But he couldn't stop. "I lost everything. The house, your house, I know it was always yours. The money, the respect, all of it. Everything fell apart the moment you left. And I realized it was all because of you. Not you destroying it, but you holding it together. You were the foundation for everything, and I was just a parasite living off what you built." Renee said nothing, just watched him unravel, her expression neutral, giving nothing away. "I was arrogant," Wade continued, his voice breaking. "I was a fool. I took what you built and convinced myself I deserved credit for it. I took your trust and your love, and I threw it away like garbage, like it meant nothing. But it meant everything. You meant everything." His voice broke completely, now tears forming, despite his desperate attempts to hold them back. He'd promised himself he wouldn't cry, wouldn't break down, would maintain some shred of dignity. But dignity was a luxury for people who still had something to lose. "Please," Wade whispered, and the microphone somehow caught even that. "Please, Renee. I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. I'm begging. I need help. What do you need, Wade?" Her voice wasn't cruel, wasn't kind either, just factual, direct. Asking a question the way you'd ask someone what they wanted to order at a restaurant. Wade's legs weakened. He grabbed the edge of a nearby podium to steady himself, the wood solid and cool under his sweating palms. "I need you to forgive me. I need a second chance. I need to not be this person anymore." "And who is this person?" "Someone who destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him," Wade said, the words pouring out now. "Someone who's losing his apartment because he can't pay rent. Someone who has no money, no prospects, no one who'll even take his calls because they all know what I did to you. Someone who wakes up every morning wishing he could go back and undo everything, but he can't, so he's just stuck living with the consequences of being the worst version of himself." "So you need money," Renee said, her tone still completely neutral. "You need me to save you financially. Is that what you're asking?" "No, I mean, yes, I mean." Wade couldn't form a coherent thought. His mind was spinning, trying to find the right words, the right approach, the right way to make her understand. "I'm asking for you to remember what we had, what we could have again, if you'd just give me another chance to—" "We never had anything, Wade." The words landed like a physical blow. Wade actually stumbled backward a step, as if she'd pushed him. "That's not true," he said desperately. "We were married. We lived together. We loved each other." "You loved what I could give you," Renee interrupted, her voice cutting through his protests like a knife. "There's a difference." She took a step closer. Wade looked up at her. She seemed taller than he remembered, or maybe he'd just become smaller. Maybe desperation has a way of shrinking people. "You stood in my kitchen," Renee said, her voice filling every corner of the ballroom, ensuring every witness heard every word. "You stood in the kitchen of the house I bought with my own bleeding hands, and you told me to sign or get out. You waved papers in my face like they were weapons. You mocked me. You smirked while trying to steal everything I'd built from nothing. Do you remember that?" Wade nodded mutely, tears streaming freely down his face now. "You told me I was nothing without you," Renee continued. "That everything I'd achieved was worthless unless you validated it. You made me doubt myself every single day we were together. Made me feel small and stupid and lucky that someone like you would even want someone like me." "I know," Wade gasped. "I know. And I'm so sorry. I don't care if you're sorry." The words were quiet, but absolute. Final as a door slamming shut. Final as dirt hitting a coffin. "I don't care about your apologies, or your regrets, or your desperate need for me to save you from the consequences of your own choices," Renee said, each word precise and devastating. "You want to know what I care about?" Wade couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Renee gestured to the crowd, to the hundreds of people watching this unfold. "I care about the 200 women in this room who've been where I was, who married people who saw them as resources instead of partners, who gave everything and got betrayal in return. I care about making sure they have the tools and support to leave safely and rebuild their lives stronger than before." She turned back to Wade, and her eyes held nothing but cold clarity. "You came here thinking what? That I'd feel sorry for you? That I'd help you because we used to be married? That seeing you broken would somehow make me want to fix you?" Wade's knees buckled. He sank down, catching himself with one hand on the stage floor. The hard wood bit into his palm, grounding him in this nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "The truth is simpler than that, Wade," Renee said, and somehow her quiet voice carried more weight than any shout could have. "I don't think about you at all." The words were a knife between his ribs, precise, clean, fatal. "You were a mistake I learned from," she continued, "a chapter I closed, a weight I put down and walked away from. And you being here right now, trying to make your crisis my problem, it's exactly who you've always been. Someone who takes and never understands that other people aren't resources for you to exploit." Wade was crying openly now, his whole body shaking with sobs he couldn't control. "Please, Renee, please don't do this. Please." "I gave you love," Renee said, her voice rising now, projecting to every corner of the ballroom with devastating clarity. I gave you trust. I gave you a home that I bled for, that I built with hands that still remember hunger. And what did you give me, Wade? He couldn't answer. Could only cry, broken sounds that didn't form words. You gave me betrayal, Renee answered her own question. You gave me mockery. You gave me years of feeling inadequate when I was extraordinary. You told me I was nothing without you, when the truth everyone here now knows, is that you were always nothing without me. The crowd was absolutely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. This was history happening. This was a moment that would be replayed and discussed and analyzed for years to come. You stand here with nothing because you valued nothing, Renee continued. Relentless now, speaking truths that couldn't be unsaid. Not me, not what we could have been, not even yourself. You saw me as a transaction, and now you're bankrupt in every way that matters. Financially, emotionally, morally, spiritually. You're empty. Wade! And you emptied yourself. Wade collapsed completely. His arms gave out and he crumpled onto the stage floor, his entire body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere primal and destroyed. He reached out, instinct, desperation, one last pathetic attempt, and grabbed the hem of Renee's gown. Renee, please, please, I'll do anything. Anything. Just help me. Just give me something. She looked down at him for a long moment. Her expression was complex. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even really pity. Something that looked almost like sadness, but colder, more distant. The sadness you feel when you see a wounded animal that's suffering but beyond saving. Then she pulled her gown free from his grip. The motion was elegant, deliberate, final. The fabric slipped through his desperate fingers like water, like smoke, like every chance he'd ever had and wasted. Her voice dropped low, intimate enough that only the first few rows could hear clearly, but every word was being recorded. Every syllable would become legend. You told me to sign and get out. Wade, now I'm going to tell you something in return. Chapter 9. The Breaking E. Distance between pride and desperation is shorter than most men think. Wade Blackwell was about to measure it in footsteps. Wade stayed on the floor, his face pressed against the polished wood of the stage, waiting for whatever final judgment Renee was about to deliver. Part of him hoped she'd help him up, tell him everything would be okay, offer him some small mercy to cling to. The human part of him that still believed in redemption, that still thought maybe kindness could exist even after everything he'd done. But a deeper part, the part that had learned painful lessons over these months of collapse, knew better, knew that mercy had to be earned. And he hadn't earned anything except exactly what he was getting. Renee took a step back, putting more distance between them. Physical space that represented the emotional gulf he'd created. She looked out at the crowd, her voice still amplified, still controlled, still devastatingly clear. Everyone here tonight came to support the foundation, she said, to help women who are trapped in relationships where their value is stolen from them piece by piece. I want you all to see what that looks like. What happens when the stealing stops? She gestured to Wade, still on the floor, still shaking with sobs he couldn't control. This is what happens when someone builds their entire identity on exploiting another person. When the exploitation ends, when the source of their stolen value is taken away, this is what's left. Nothing, because they never had anything real to begin with. Wade tried to push himself up. His arms shook with the effort. He made it to his knees, looking up at Renee with tears and desperation streaking his face. His borrowed suit was wrinkled now, stained with his tears, looking even more pathetic than it had when he'd arrived. I understand now, he said, his voice breaking. I understand what I did to you, how I made you feel, the person I was. And I swear, Renee, I swear I would do anything to take it back. Anything to be different. Anything to undo the damage. But you can't, Renee said simply. That's the thing about consequences, Wade. They don't care about regret. They don't care about apologies. They just are. They're the natural result of choices made, and you can't unmake them, no matter how much you wish you could. She turned back to the audience, speaking to them now rather than to him. I could help him, theoretically. I have the resources. I could pay off his debts, give him a job, pull him out of the hole he dug for himself. Wade's heart leaped with desperate hope. She was considering it. She was actually, but I won't, Renee continued, and the hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Not because I'm cruel, not because I want him to suffer, but because helping him would send the wrong message. It would say that exploiting someone, betraying them, trying to steal their life's work, that all of that is forgivable if you just cry enough afterward. The crowd murmured agreement. Heads nodded throughout the ballroom. Every woman in this room needs to know that you don't have to save people who hurt you, Renee said, her voice carrying conviction that resonated in every listener. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You don't have to sacrifice your peace, your success, your hard-won freedom to rescue someone from the natural consequences of their choices. The applause started again, building gradually. Not celebration of Wade's suffering, but recognition of Renee's truth. Permission to stop carrying people who never carried them back. Wade felt something crack inside him. Not his heart, that was already broken. Something deeper, his sense of self, his fundamental understanding of who he was and how the world worked. Every story he'd told himself about his importance, his value, his deserving of good things, all of it shattered under the weight of reality. He'd been wrong about everything. About Renee, about himself, about what mattered, about how relationships worked, about what it meant to be a partner versus a parasite. He'd constructed an entire worldview built on lies. And now those lies were collapsing and burying him in the rubble. Stand up. Wade, Renee said, her voice softer now, but no less commanding. He struggled to his feet, unsteady, swaying slightly. His borrowed suit hung wrong on his diminished frame. His face was a mess of tears and humiliation, and the kind of pain that comes from truly seeing yourself for the first time. But he stood because she'd told him to. And even now, even after everything, some part of him still responded to her authority. Renee looked him in the eye, really looked at him, and he saw himself reflected in her gaze. Small, broken, pathetic, everything he'd become. Everything he'd always been, just hidden better. I want you to hear me clearly, Renee said. I want you to understand this completely, so there's no confusion later. No room for you to misinterpret or hold on to false hope. Wade nodded, unable to speak, tears still streaming down his face. You and I will never be together again. Not as partners, not as friends, not in any capacity. I will never help you financially. I will never give you a reference or make a call on your behalf or open a door that you can't open yourself. Whatever happens to you from this moment forward is entirely on you. I understand, Wade whispered, the words barely audible even in the silent ballroom. Do you? Renee's eyes were sharp, searching, making sure he truly grasped what she was saying. Because part of me thinks you came here believing you could manipulate me one more time. Play on whatever feelings I might still have. Make me feel guilty enough or sorry enough to save you from yourself. No, Wade started. But his voice failed him. The feelings I had for you died the night you threw papers in my face and told me to leave my own house, Renee said, each word precise and final. You killed them, Wade. You murdered whatever love existed between us. And you can't resurrect something you murdered. It's gone. We're gone. There is no us anymore, and there never will be again. The words landed with the weight of absolute finality. Wade felt them settling into his bones, becoming part of his reality in a way he couldn't deny or avoid. I don't hate you, Renee said, and somehow that was worse than hatred could have been. I don't think about you enough to hate you. You're just someone who taught me an important lesson about protecting myself. That's all you are now, a lesson, not a person I care about, not a part of my life. Just a cautionary tale I sometimes share with women who need to hear it. Wade's legs started shaking again. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to make her see him as something more than just a villain in her origin story. But what could he say? Everything she'd said was true. He had been all those things. He had done all those things, and now he was paying for them. "I'm sorry," he said one more time, because it was the only thing left, the only words he had that felt even remotely adequate, even though they fell so far short of what he owed her. "I know you are," Renee replied, and there was something almost gentle in her voice now. Not forgiveness, never forgiveness, but acknowledgement, recognition of his genuine remorse, even if it changed nothing. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't undo harm. Sorry is just a word you say when you realize you destroyed something you can't replace. She took a breath, and Wade saw her preparing for the final blow, the killing stroke. The words that would define both of them forever. "You told me to sign and get out, Wade. You waved those papers in my face, like weapons. You smirked like you'd won some game I didn't know we were playing. You thought forcing me out of my own house would break me, that I'd beg, that I'd crumble, that I'd prove you right about my worthlessness." The crowd was completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Everyone in the ballroom was frozen, witnessing this moment, understanding they were seeing something that would be talked about for years. "So now I'm going to tell you something," Renee said, her voice rising again, filling the ballroom with clear, unwavering authority. "And I want everyone here to witness it. I want it recorded and remembered and understood completely." Wade braced himself, knowing whatever came next would break him completely. Knowing he deserved it, and knowing there was no escape, Renee's voice rang out like a bell, clear and powerful and absolutely final. "You told me to sign and get out. Today I tell you, kneel and stay out, forever." The words hung in the air like a verdict from which there was no appeal. Wade's legs gave out completely, not dramatically, not for show. His body simply stopped holding him up. The strength left his legs all at once, and he collapsed onto the stage floor again, this time with no attempt to catch himself. His face hit the wood with a sound that made people in the front row wince, and then he broke. Completely, utterly, irrevocably, not theatrically, not performatively. This was real breaking. The kind that happens when every defense, every lie you've told yourself, every shred of denial gets stripped away, and you're forced to see yourself exactly as you are. No filters, no excuses, no redemption, Wade sobbed. Deep animal sounds that came from somewhere primal and wounded. Sounds that didn't even seem human. His whole body shook with it, racked with the kind of crying that feels like dying. He clutched at the stage floor like he was falling into an abyss, and it was the only thing keeping him from disappearing completely. "I'm sorry," he gasped between sobs, the words barely intelligible. "I'm so sorry. God, I'm so sorry." The apology repeated like a broken record, like a prayer to a God who'd stopped listening. He said it over and over, as if repetition could somehow undo what he'd done, could somehow shift reality and restore what he'd destroyed. But reality doesn't work that way. Actions have consequences. Choices have results. And Wade was living in the wreckage of every choice he'd made. The ballroom erupted. Not in pity for Wade, but in thunderous applause for Renee. People rose to their feet, the standing ovation even more powerful than before. This wasn't just recognition of her success anymore. This was witnessing justice. This was seeing a woman take her power back completely. This was the moment where the victim became the victor, and everyone wanted to be part of that story. Cameras flashed like lightning. Phones recorded from every angle. This moment would go viral within hours. It would be dissected and discussed and analyzed. It would become part of business school curricula and TED Talks and conversations about power dynamics and consequences. Renee turned her back on Wade's crumpled, crying form and walked off the stage. Her head was high. Her stride was powerful. The crowd parted for her like water, reaching out to touch her arm, to congratulate her, to simply be near someone who just demonstrated what real strength looked like. Behind her, Wade stayed on the stage floor, his body racked with sobs that seemed endless. He couldn't stop crying, couldn't catch his breath, couldn't do anything except lie there and break under the weight of what he'd done and what he'd become. Security approached after a few minutes, not roughly, but firmly. They helped him to his feet with professional courtesy that somehow made the humiliation worse. They weren't angry at him. They didn't mock him. They just did their job, which was removing someone who didn't belong. "Come on, sir," one of them said, not unkindly. "Time to go." They led him off the stage through the service entrance. The back way, the exit reserved for deliveries and trash removal and people who didn't belong in the front of the house. Wade stumbled between them, barely able to walk, his face still in his hands, his whole body still shaking with sobs that wouldn't stop. The gala continued without him. Music started playing. People returned to their tables. Conversations resumed. The program went on as if he'd never existed, as if his breakdown had been nothing more than a brief interruption before the real event continued. Because in the story, Renee was building the story of women rising from betrayal stronger than before. He wasn't even the antagonist. He was just an obstacle she'd already overcome, a speed bump on her road to success, something to step over and keep moving past. Wade was led through kitchens where staff barely glanced at him, through hallways that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet, finally out a back door into an alley where dumpsters sat and delivery trucks made their stops. "You need someone to call?" one of the security guards asked, his voice genuinely concerned now that they were away from the crowd. "A ride, someone to pick you up." Wade shook his head. He couldn't speak, couldn't form words, could only stand there in the alley behind the Grand Heights Hotel, wearing his borrowed suit and borrowed shoes, and feel the full weight of what had just happened settling onto his shoulders like concrete. He'd humiliated himself in front of hundreds of people. He'd begged and cried and broken down completely. And for what? For nothing. Renee had given him exactly what he deserved, nothing, and sent him away to figure out his own life. The security guards waited a few more minutes to make sure he was okay, then headed back inside. Wade stood alone in the alley, listening to the muffled sounds of the gala continuing inside. Music, laughter, the sounds of success and celebration and people who belonged. He didn't belong anywhere anymore. Wade started walking. He didn't know where he was going, didn't have a destination. The person who'd given him a ride was long gone, horrified by what had happened, probably never wanting to see Wade again. He'd have to figure out buses or walking or something. His feet hurt in the borrowed shoes. His eyes were swollen from crying. His throat was raw. But he kept walking because what else was there to do? Behind him, inside the ballroom, Renee was probably giving her speech now. The real one, the one about the foundation and its mission and all the good it was doing. She was probably inspiring people, moving them to donate, building something that mattered. And he was walking through dark streets alone, with nothing and no one, exactly where his choices had led him. Mercy is a gift given to those who showed it first. Wade Blackwell had shown nothing but contempt, and now the scales would balance. Chapter 10. The final judgment. Renee didn't watch Wade being escorted out. She'd said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. Looking back would serve no purpose. The past was settled. Only the future mattered now. The rest of the gala proceeded exactly as planned. After the intensity of what had just happened, Renee gave the crowd a moment to settle, then continued with her prepared remarks. She spoke about the Foundation's mission, about the women they'd helped, about the programs they were building. Her voice was steady, her message was clear, and the audience, energized by what they'd witnessed, responded with unprecedented generosity. Donors pledged more money that night than Renee had dared hope for. Women came forward to volunteer, to share their stories, to become part of something bigger than themselves. She stayed until the very end, thanking every guest personally, making sure everyone felt seen and valued. This was her mission now. Not revenge, that would require thinking about Wade, but purpose, building something that mattered, creating change that lasted beyond her own story. When the ballroom finally emptied and the last guest had left, Renee stood alone in the space where she'd just rewritten her history. The stage where she'd stood over Wade's broken body. The floor where he'd wept and begged and proved exactly who he'd always been, Patricia Vance. Her lawyer approached with a tablet, her expression somewhere between professional satisfaction and genuine admiration. The press is asking for statements. Several major outlets want interviews. And there's already a video trending online. Over 2 million views in the last hour. Let it trend, Renee said calmly. The message stands on its own. I don't need to add commentary. There's something else. Patricia hesitated, which was unusual for her. Wade's former lawyer contacted me about an hour ago. Apparently, he's concerned about his former client's mental state after tonight. He was making vague suggestions about potential harassment claims, though even he didn't sound convinced. Renee almost laughed. Of course, one last desperate attempt to make himself the victim. And what did you tell him? I told him that Wade came to your event uninvited. Technically, he was invited, but the invitation didn't constitute an obligation to protect him from himself. You gave him the opportunity to speak, which he took voluntarily. He chose to humiliate himself publicly. There's no harassment. There's just consequence. Patricia smiled slightly. I also mentioned that we have security footage, hundreds of witnesses, and a very clear record of who did what to whom. He dropped the matter immediately. Good, Renee said. She'd expected something like this. Wade grasping at straws, trying one last time to shift the narrative, to make his suffering her responsibility, but his suffering wasn't her responsibility. It never had been. He'd made his choices, and now he was living with them. That's how consequences worked. Over the following weeks, the video of that night spread across the internet like wildfire. Not because people were cruel, though some comments certainly were, but because it resonated. Millions of people, mostly women, saw themselves in Renee's story, saw their own betrayals reflected in Wade's manipulation, saw their own strength validated in her refusal to save him. The foundation received applications from thousands of women seeking help. Renee expanded operations into 6 new cities within 2 months. She hired more staff, trained more volunteers, built more networks of support that stretched across the country. Her company grew too. Business contacts who'd once dealt with Wade came back, treating her with the respect she'd always deserved. New opportunities appeared. Her name became synonymous, not just with survival, but with strategic brilliance and transformative leadership. Magazines featured her story. Universities invited her to speak. A major publisher offered a substantial advance for her autobiography. Renee considered each opportunity carefully, saying yes to what served her mission, and no to what felt exploitative or extractive. And Wade, the internet tracked him for a while, though with less interest as weeks turned to months. Photos surfaced occasionally, him leaving a homeless shelter, him working a manual labor job, him looking older and more worn than someone his age should look. Renee saw some of the photos, not because she sought them out, but because people sent them to her, thinking she'd want to see proof of his continued suffering. Thinking it would give her satisfaction to witness his ongoing misery. It didn't. His suffering brought her no joy. His success would bring her no concern. He simply didn't matter to her anymore. He was a closed chapter in a book she'd moved beyond. One evening, months after the gala, Renee stood at her 5th training center for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The crowd cheered. Photographers captured the moment. Women she'd helped stood beside her, their faces bright with hope and determination, and the kind of strength that comes from surviving something that tried to break you. The photographer reviewing his shots later noticed something odd in one of the frames. In the corner, barely visible through the crowd, a hunched figure stood across the street, staring at the ceremony. The photographer zoomed in, enhanced the image, and realized it was Wade Blackwell, still watching, still lurking on the edges of her life. The photographer sent the image to Patricia, who forwarded it to Renee with a note. Thought you should know he's still watching. Renee looked at the photo for exactly 3 seconds before deleting it. He can watch all he wants, she told Patricia. I'm not looking back. And she never did. Wade became a ghost in his own life. He found work eventually, jobs that paid enough to survive, but never enough to rebuild. Manual labor, warehouse work, The kind of employment that ground you down but kept you alive. He stayed in cheap apartments and rooming houses, places that provided shelter but never home. Some people gave him chances, usually women who'd been through their own struggles and understood that people could change, that redemption was possible. Wade took those chances and genuinely tried to be better, to be honest, to be the person he should have been all along. But reputation is a weight that doesn't lift easily. And trust, once destroyed so completely, is almost impossible to rebuild. People would Google his name and find the video, find the articles, find the story of what he'd done to Renee Hall. Jobs would disappear. Opportunities would evaporate. Relationships would end before they really began. Years passed. Renee's empire continued to grow. The foundation helped tens of thousands of women escape abuse and build independent lives. She became a national figure, then an international one. Her name appeared in business textbooks as an example of resilience and strategic thinking. Young women cited her as an inspiration for what was possible when you refused to let anyone diminish you. And Wade, he aged in the shadow of what he'd destroyed. People forgot about him gradually, the way society forgets about failures. He wasn't interesting anymore, wasn't cautionary. Just another man who'd made terrible choices and paid for them. The world moved on. One afternoon, Renee was interviewed for a documentary about financial abuse and recovery. The interviewer, a thoughtful woman with kind eyes, asked the question Renee had been asked 100 times. Do you ever think about your ex-husband? Wonder how he's doing? Renee considered the question carefully, the way she considered everything now. I think about the lesson he taught me. I think about how his betrayal forced me to build protections into everything I do now. I think about how that betrayal, as painful as it was, ultimately made me stronger and more careful. But him as a person? The interviewer pressed gently. No, Renee said simply, her voice clear and certain. I left him behind exactly where he deserved to be, in the past, powerless and forgotten, while I built the future with my own hands. The interview became one of the documentary's most quoted segments. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Because it gave voice to something millions of people felt but couldn't articulate. You don't owe continued thought to people who tried to destroy you. You don't have to carry them in your heart or your mind. You can simply let them go and move forward without them. Wade saw the documentary. Of course he did. How could he not when it featured his ex-wife and touched on his greatest failure? He watched it alone in his small apartment, a different one than the studio he'd been evicted from, but not much better. He watched Renee speak about betrayal and strength and building something from nothing. Watched her surrounded by people who loved and respected her. Watched her living the life she'd earned through genuine effort and authentic strength, and he understood, finally and completely, what he'd thrown away. Not just the money, or the house, or the status. Those were symptoms, surface-level losses that masked the deeper tragedy. What he'd thrown away was the chance to be part of something real, to love someone genuinely instead of exploiting them, to build something together instead of trying to steal what she'd built alone. To be a partner instead of a parasite. He'd had everything that mattered, and he destroyed it because he was too small, too greedy, too fundamentally broken to recognize value when it was right in front of him. Wade turned off the documentary and sat in the dark, thinking about the night at the gala. The night she'd told him to kneel and stay out forever. He'd thought it was cruel then, excessive, unfair. Now he understood it was just accurate, just true. She'd simply named what he'd become. Someone who belonged on his knees, someone who deserved to be shut out, someone who'd forfeited any right to be part of her world. He'd tried to make her nothing, and instead he'd become nothing himself. Not because she destroyed him, she'd simply stopped holding him up. And without her support, without the foundation she'd provided, that he'd mistaken for his own strength, he had nothing to stand on, because he'd never actually built anything. He'd just borrowed her foundation and called it his own. Across town, Renee stood in her office looking out at the city lights, having just finished a meeting about expanding the foundation into European markets. The work was challenging, exhausting, and deeply fulfilling. She was building something that would outlast her, something that would continue helping people long after she was gone. Her assistant knocked softly. "Ready to go home, Ms. Hall?" "Just one more minute," Renee said, though she wasn't sure why. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, saw the woman she'd become, strong, independent, complete, a woman who'd taken hunger and pain and betrayal and forged them into something powerful and lasting, a woman who knew her own worth so completely that no one could ever make her doubt it again. For just a moment, she thought about Wade, about where he might be now, what he might be doing, whether he'd learned anything or just kept being the same person in smaller, sadder circumstances. Then she let the thought go, released it like a bird into the night. He wasn't her concern. He wasn't her responsibility. He was just someone who'd once tried to steal her life and failed. A footnote in her story, a cautionary tale she sometimes shared, but mostly he was nothing. And that was exactly what he deserved to be. Renee turned away from the window, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the office without looking back. The past was settled. The future was waiting. And she had work to do, important work, meaningful work, work that mattered far more than any revenge could ever satisfy. Because the best revenge wasn't making Wade suffer. The best revenge was building a life so full and purposeful and extraordinary that he simply didn't factor into it at all. And that's exactly what Renee Hall had done. Then she let the thought go, released it like a bird into the night. He wasn't her concern. He wasn't her responsibility. He was just someone who'd once tried to steal her life and failed. A footnote in her story, a cautionary tale she sometimes shared, but mostly he was nothing. And that was exactly what he deserved to be. Renee turned away from the window, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the office without looking back. The past was settled. The future was waiting. And she had work to do, important work, meaningful work, work that mattered far more than any revenge could ever satisfy. Because the best revenge wasn't making Wade suffer. The best revenge was building a life so full and purposeful and extraordinary that he simply didn't factor into it at all. And that's exactly what Renee Hall had done. The greatest lesson for my beautiful family. Some people will see your strength and try to steal it. They will marry your success and call it partnership. They will take credit for foundations they never laid. They will stand in houses they never built and declare themselves the architect. And when you finally see them clearly, when the mask slips and you recognize the theft, you will face a choice that defines everything. You can exhaust yourself trying to make them understand what they took. You can set yourself on fire trying to illuminate their darkness, or you can do something far more powerful. You can stop holding them up. Your value is not determined by who recognizes it. Your worth is not validated by who stays. Your strength is not measured by who you can carry. It is proven by who you have the wisdom to put down. The people who diminish you understand your worth perfectly. That is why they steal it. They know they cannot build what you built. They know they cannot survive what you survived. So they convince you that your achievements are luck, that your strength is circumstance, that without them, you are nothing. And if you believe that lie, you will hand them the keys to everything you bled for and call it love. But love doesn't ask you to be smaller. Partnership does not require self-doubt. Marriage should never feel like erasing your own name from your story. The greatest victory is not destroying those who tried to destroy you. It is refusing to save them from themselves. It is understanding that watching someone face natural consequences is not cruelty. It is simply stepping aside and letting gravity work. Protect yourself, even within love. Especially within love. Document your worth. Keep your name on what you build. Trust but verify. Hope for the best, but prepare for betrayal. Love deeply, but never forget to love yourself first. And if someone ever tells you to sign or get out, remember, the keys you place on the table might look like surrender, but they can be a detonation. The signature you write might seem like defeat, but it can be a declaration of war on everything that tried to make you small. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone think they won, then walk away and build something so magnificent that their small victory becomes their greatest loss. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You are not obligated to save people from the consequences of trying to destroy you. You are not cruel for refusing to rebuild what someone else burned down. You are just finally, powerfully, irrevocably free.